an American entrepreneur who has started, scaled, and sold 6 companies of his own, all 7 or 8-figure exits. Mac and his companies have been featured on CNN, The Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, Business North Carolina, USA Today, and the New York Times. Notable ventures include KYCK, acquired by NBC Sports, Mountain Khakis, acquired by Remington, and the Internet Soccer Network, acquired by division of News Corp Sky. He additionally served as a member on the board of directors for LendingTree. NASDAQ's ticker code is TREE, for over 5 years, and is currently an angel investor in over 50 companies. And Mac has also helped a number of COO Alliance companies exit their businesses as well. So Mac, welcome to the COO Alliance, and thank you for sharing with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind intro. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and I will get started. All right.
We can see it.
All right, perfect. Thanks again for the intro. I have a lot of content that I want to share with you all, hopefully a lot of actionable stuff. And so I'm just going to dive right in. I won't belabor my background since Cameron just did a great job of hitting the highlights. Most notably, taking 6 companies from idea to exit. What I never put on my highlight reel is the 5 million mistakes I made along the way. And in so many ways, that actually helps inform more about what I do and what I share these days. So I learned a lot the hard way, made a few good decisions along the way. Only other things I would mention, a big part of my life was really optimized around whatever company I was running in my family. So if you get to know me at all, I talk a lot about how I optimize my life to travel the world with my kids and spend time with my family. And then most recently, kind of a new chapter, I bought a professional soccer team in southern Spain. So kind of a new thing for me, which I'm excited about. In terms of my exit journey, again, won't belabor this at all, but my particular companies were in a couple different industries. So I had software and technology businesses. I had media companies. I had a number of sports related businesses. I even had an apparel company. So a good bit of diversity in terms of my own ventures. And then on the right-hand side, also some diversity in terms of who I sold my companies to. So I sold to domestic buyers and international buyers. I sold to private companies, and I sold to public companies. So lots of different experiences. A few things worked out really well. Feel very fortunate and blessed. A lot of mistakes that have informed my later exits and certainly what I do today. So again, real fast background there. So why do I like to talk about exits? There are a couple really big, important reasons. Number one, for most entrepreneurs, an exit is the largest financial opportunity they will have in their lives. So there is a lot at stake for an exit. But the other thing that I really want to point out, and I think is particularly relevant for this group, is that I fundamentally believe if you design your business so that it has the option to sell, that you're basically building a better company. Once you've designed a business so that someone wants to buy it and wants to pay a premium for it, you're building a better business. So that's kind of woven into everything we talk about. Whether you choose to exit or not, I believe you want the option and it creates a better business. So because the media is so pervasive these days, and because you're all participating in an impressive group of humans, COO Alliance, it's easy to see acquisitions happening all around us, right? If we pay attention to the media, every day we can see a 100 million, 200 million, billion-dollar acquisition happening. We're probably all 1 degree from people within, this group and others that we hear about these amazing exits. We also are seeing these unicorns being created at the fastest pace in history. So what that really does, I believe, is that it tells us that if we create a great product and a great company, that one day we're going to be able to take that public, or that people are literally going to be knocking down our door when it's time and we're ready to sell it. But what you need to know is this, what I call unfortunate reality. And that is that only about 1 out of every 5 listed companies, and listed meaning these are people that are actively trying to exit. Maybe they've hired an M&A advisor, an investment banker, they've listed that it is truly for sale, and they're trying to get through the exit door. Only about 20% of those ever close a deal. The other thing that's becoming very relevant is what people are calling the silver tsunami, and the kind of the baby boom generation, as they look to exit their business because they're retiring. In a lot of cases, just the numbers say that millions and millions of new businesses are going to be for sale in the coming years, and there are not going to be significantly more buyers. So the percentages could even drop below 20%. But most importantly, the thing I want to make sure everyone's thinking about is, I believe and have experienced myself that even those that exit, there's probably a single-digit percentage of those that if you interviewed the founder, the leadership team, those involved in the exit, and said, you just sold your company, did you maximize value? Very few are going to say yes to that. Most are going to realize after the fact, when it's obviously too late, that they failed to maximize the value that they had. And so one of my overarching points that I want to make is that if you wait for buyers to show up, and you're likely not to ever get to an exit first and foremost, but even if you do, I believe you can leave millions of dollars on the table. And I put millions with asterisk because dollars are very relative. If you're running a low 8-figure business, I'm very confident most people leave millions on the table. If you're running a mid 8-figure, high 8-figure, or 9-figure business, it can get to 10 million or more very, very quickly. Often with little simple things that if you would have done them, they would be part of the exit value. So that's a really, really important message. It's also a really big tragedy because, again, I know a lot of people on this particular call and in this group, you might be second in command, you might be a COO. But if you interview entrepreneurs across the world and founders across the world, about 3/4 of all entrepreneurs express an interest or a need to sell their business at some point. So what happens is most founders are left with unrealistic expectations of what their company's value is and what it will ever take to get to that exit. Again, the odds are very stacked against us, less than 20%. So a few things that I want to mention, and again, I'm going to talk relatively fast because I want to leave time for Q&A at the end. But one thing that often is a big disconnect is how the market sees your business. And I call this tragedy number 2 because so many founders and leaders believe the value is at a certain point, only to find out when they go to market or they do a market analysis, there's a really significant gap. And in my program, Exit DNA, this group I run, we use a real simple framework that I call the football field valuation that takes little simple financial metrics, last 12 months EBITDA, last 12 months revenue. We apply it across a variety of valuation metrics. But for today's talk, I'm going to kind of cut to the chase. If you look at where most companies are sold around the world, it's almost always, or a large percentage, is going to be on EBITDA multiples. That's the most common metric used for valuation of deals getting closed. And across the last 5 years, and this is still relevant today, this goes through 2020, the numbers are very consistent. Around the world, 4.7 times EBITDA is the average exit valuation. And a lot of people might be saying, you know what, I run a biotech business or I run a SaaS company and our metrics are different. And of course, that is absolutely the case, that some industries have different metrics that are used to value companies. But across all geographies, all size of companies, and all industries, 4.7 times EBITDA, or let's call it 5 times EBITDA, is the average of all the deals that get done. So the question that you should be sort of digesting at this point, and this may be you, it may be your CEO, maybe your leadership team or your board, is imagine asking the CEO or yourself, would you sell your company today for 4.7 times EBITDA? Or maybe even a slightly more aggressive multiple, like 7 times EBITDA. Would you sell today for that multiple? And I honestly hope the answer is no. I fundamentally believe you should not sell for financial multiples, period, but certainly at those levels. And if you're saying or thinking no, you're in good company. We're going to talk about the ways that you can shift that dynamic. But what's really important is even if you say yes, hey, if someone came in today and offered 7 times EBITDA, I would sell the business. The things that we're going to talk about here shortly can add money and value to your exit. So either way, it's really important. Now, before we dive into some very specific things I want to recommend, I want to share that there are clearly some companies that defy the odds. If you see 4.7 times, EBITDA, you might be frustrated or upset or confused because that doesn't sort of jive with what you've seen or heard. There are companies, some that we're very familiar with, that not only defy the odds, they've done it in a very dramatic fashion. Microsoft purchases Yammer for over $1 billion. That's at 40 times revenue. Yahoo, again, purchases Tumblr, over $1 billion, 85 times revenue, not EBITDA, revenue. Google purchases a division of Motorola and pays over $12 billion in cash. Or maybe the most notable example that many of us are familiar with is when Facebook purchased WhatsApp for $19 billion. At that time, they had almost no revenue and very few employees. So the question becomes, what is it that these companies are doing differently? What is it they're doing that leads to these dramatic outcomes and dramatic multiples? And the answer is these companies were all sold based on their strategic value to the buyer. They were not financial deals. And I think it gets really confusing when you see, well, yeah, but it was 85 times revenue or it was 40 times revenue. I guarantee you, no one ever went into those organizations and said, we're offering you 80 times revenue. There was $1 billion worth of value to Microsoft. They paid $1 billion because that's the strategic value to their business. They paid WhatsApp $19 billion because that's what it was worth strategically for Facebook. After the fact, after the deal is closed, someone on Wall Street or someone in the media said, you got paid $1 billion. What were your revenues at the time of the acquisition? And they just reverse engineered the math. It has nothing to do with financial metrics. Those were absolutely purely strategic deals. All right, so what we're going to talk about here, I'm going to go through each one of these relatively quickly because I want to make sure we cover them all. But these are 4 critical shifts that most people won't make. But I believe if you make these shifts in your business, they're going to lead to a dramatically different and better outcome, both in terms of the ability to exit, but also building a better business. So let's talk about each one. So critical shift number 1, probably not surprising after what I just said. Critical shift number 1 is you have to focus on strategic value. So I love this chart. You may have seen something similar before, but if you talk to people, a lot of people, when you start talking about strategic value, will say, hey, Mac, that's kind of a soft or fluffy thing to say. Numbers are hard hitting, right? So people are really used to saying, I want to focus on EBITDA or revenue because that's really hard hitting. This is a chart that shows the S&P 500 from 1975 to about 2020 and what percentage of the market value of these 500 arguably most valuable companies on earth are made up from tangible assets versus intangible assets. Back in 1975, of course, most of the value of the companies in the S&P 500 were things that you could touch and feel. It was equipment, it was inventory, it was things that you could literally, factories, all of these things. That's where the bulk of the value was. Over time, relatively quickly, you can see a pretty big shift up until 2020, when 90% of the value of the S&P 500, again, the largest, most successful companies on earth, is made up of intangible value, things that you cannot touch and feel. So you may be thinking, what are some examples? What are intangible assets? And I know a lot of smart people on this call know what these things are, but here's some examples, right? All forms of intellectual property, patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, goodwill. There are also things like brand recognition, so your brand itself, internet domain names. People laugh at that one sometimes. One of the public companies I'm on the board of, we sold a domain name for $8 million in cash. Like, sometimes these things have enormous value. Certainly customer lists, employment contracts, the intellectual capital of your business. These are intangible assets. So when you think about a company like Google or Apple or Tesla or any of these major mainstream companies, 90% of how they are valued by Wall Street and investors and the public is because of things like this, not because of inventory or factories or hard assets they have. It's because of these things. So that's strategic value. So what do buyers really want? Because almost everyone, if they entered an exit process very quickly, they're going to hear questions almost right off the bat. What's your EBITDA? What was last 12 months revenue? What's your growth rate? What's your margin? You know, all of these things are very, very financially driven. But the reality is what people are trying to purchase are things like the ones listed here on this page. They're looking for unique products and services. They're looking for brands. You know, if you look at that S&P 500 chart, if you were to go back 10 years, and some of them are still in this case today, they were once large multi-billion dollar organizations whose brand no longer resonates with the current generation. The brand feels old and feels tired. There are lots of organizations around the world that may manufacture in Asia, or they may do things in Europe. And when it comes to international marketing, their brand isn't relevant. So you may have a brand that's worth more than every dollar you've ever generated to the right buyer. Intellectual property, often underutilized asset that can be monetized and exit. And then one of the things that I really experienced firsthand in several of my companies is creating powerful and unique distribution, meaning how we took our simple products to market. If we found a unique way to do that and it was exclusive or proprietary for us, when the market discovers that that's a really powerful distribution channel, people are often willing to pay you just to have access to what is otherwise an exclusive distribution channel. So all of these things that are exclusive and proprietary, when they become strategic to the right buyer, they're willing to pay a massive premium. So if you hear nothing else, and I hope that's not the case, I hope we cover a lot of things that are valuable, but I want you to know and think about the fact that in just a few minutes, we could take your numbers and give you a value based on how the market is likely to look at your company with financial metrics. And you probably could find someone that would pay you 3 or 5 or 7 times EBITDA without too much trouble, because I know people in this group are running really good companies. But if you sell your business based on financial metrics, I fundamentally believe you are leaving money on the table. You have to sell your business based on strategic value to the buyer. All right, so that was critical shift number 1. Critical shift number 2, you have to develop what I call an irresistible exit story. And early in my career, my mentor used to always say, Mac, every business has an arc. It has some way that it's growing over time. And when it comes time to talk about our business, and if we're in the process of considering selling it, what happens is we very likely default to where we are today and where we've come from. We tell the story of our first year in business and what our revenue was, and then how much we grew from year 1 to year 2, and how year 3 we gained market share and EBITDA really took off. And so we have this natural tendency to talk about history and everything that led up to where we are today. And the reality is, when it comes time to sell your business, what you really want to do is illustrate potential. You want to show prospective buyers where you're going and why you're likely to get there. To me, that is so much of the value, is having buyers understand that they need and want to buy you because of the path that you're on going forward, because they never want you to get to that ultimate destination that you're painting a picture for. That's when you're most expensive. They want to buy now when they believe you're on that path and you're likely to get there. So we're always talking about the potential of where we're going. And I think the most powerful way you can do that is to sell the future, is what I generally refer to it as. And let me give you just a couple of quick examples here. So when you're talking to prospective buyers, people that might be interested or might be seriously interested in your business, the most important thing to do is have them start to imagine the future as if the deal is done. And they're starting to see all of the possibilities when you are in fact working together. If they start to imagine what life is like when their sales force has access to your products and services, they see a really bright picture. When they know that when the deal's done, they can sell their products into your clients because now you're combined. And another huge thing, and I've got it bold on here, is most entrepreneurs lay in bed at night thinking of what a lot of people call 2 a.m. issues, challenges, problems, concerns. Maybe you have a major client that you think is going to be leaving your organization, maybe your head of engineering or some key employee, or you're worried about the supply chain, you're about to lose something. it's really, really valuable when you're talking to prospective buyers, because you can say, remember, when this deal is done, we're using your supply chain. If we have a financing problem today, that problem goes away when the deal closes because we're leveraging your balance sheet, your line of credit. So what was today a risk or a weakness goes away. And a lot of times you can literally see executives on the buy side sort of process and go, yeah, that's true. That's right. I forgot. Yes, we don't have to worry about their financing challenges. They're a $30 million company, but we're a $3 billion company. That's no longer an issue. So your weaknesses can be, kind of decimated or go away based on the strengths of the buyer. Now, this one is really, really important. This is kind of I would call it a negotiating tactic, but it's really important to think of it as a totally different way to present your numbers. And again, a lot of COOs, a lot of CFOs and financially minded people will hopefully appreciate this. It's basically using their math, not yours. Your math is always EBITDA, revenue, margin, all those things. So let me give you a real world example of someone that I was working with. There was a small, very early stage software company that was selling this training software in sports. And so they were kind of beta testing. They had about 5,000 customers, $1,650 a month. They were just coming out of beta. So about $1 million in revenue, really early stage. We're at about 100,000 in EBITDA, so profitable. And they thought their margin was going to really take off as they scaled the business. But they had a big decision to make. Should we raise capital? Should we sell the business? There's some interest in buying us. What do we do? That's about the time I met them. So they actually did some research. They spoke to a few investment bankers and M&A advisors kind of on an informal basis to get a sense of what is my business worth. They heard a lot of different things, kind of all over the board. A lot of people, of course, said the valuation of your business is probably sub $1 million because you're small, you're early stage, there's a lot of risk. So there just isn't a lot of value created yet. They did hear one or two groups that said, you know what, because you're software, because you're profitable already, you could get a multiple as high as 3 times revenue, which would value the company about $3 million. Someone even said, 25 times EBITDA or 2.5 million, because you're growing so quickly, people are going to give you credit for that growth, even though it might be in some sort of earnout. So this was their math. This was taking their EBITDA, their revenue, having people assign value. So one of their prospective buyers was a sports franchise company. And this buyer, and this was a real world scenario, this buyer had 600,000 customers all over the United States who were families that were paying them generally 1 or 2 times a year for a sports program. So it was very lumpy, spring and fall and that kind of thing. And this company was looking to generate some reoccurring revenue, which was more predictable, and software recurring revenue was the most valuable thing to them. So what was their math, right? What's the buyer's math in this scenario? And this is what I explained to the founders of this small software company. I said, here's what I would do if I were in your shoes. I'd go to the sports franchise company and I would say, you've told us you love our software. You've told us you need recurring revenue. You've indicated that it's a perfect fit, and you've already talked to some of the families about it and they're interested in it. They want it, they want to buy it, right? So to be conservative, maybe 10% buy in the first year. Does that sound reasonable? And then we grow it from there. So you're sort of asking the buyer, and the buyer would say something, yes, plus or minus, that's kind of how we're thinking. So all of a sudden, if you take 10% of 600,000, which is their customers, it's 60,000 times $1,650 a month, that's $12 million. So you're taking your business and you're literally handing $12 million plus of growth in the first year to this buyer. Plus you're giving them the reoccurring revenue stream that they wanted. You're giving them 5,000 of your customers, so new customers to them, less some overlap. So all of a sudden, the conversation is very different. And I don't ever expect that you're going to show someone their math and they're going to say, okay, great, Mac, we'll give you $12 million cash. But you can imagine how different the conversation is when you paint the picture of what you're giving them, why it's so valuable, and how it's strategic. I know for myself, there is no way I'm talking about $1 or $2 million in revenue or valuation when I share this math. Again, we're not getting 12, but we're probably meeting in the middle now versus something else. And even if we take some of it in performance, I would get more cash at close than I was going to get for any of the revenue multiples that was shared with me. So that's using their math, not yours. And it's really important. All right. So that was critical shift number 2. Critical shift number 3. We have to find the best buyers. Remember the companies that we talked about just a little bit earlier. These were organizations that defied the odds. They did it in a dramatic way. We said they all sold to a strategic buyer. But there was something else that was a common thread for each one of these companies that's really important. And that is that each one of these companies were acquired by a business trying to enter a new market. So the buyer was someone in a different market trying to enter a new market. Now, it's always easy for me to talk about Google as such a shining example of strategic versus financial, simply because almost all of us recognize Google doesn't need money in any way, shape, or form. They don't need to buy revenue. They don't need to buy EBITDA. They don't need to buy cash. They have more money than they could spend in a lifetime. So in this particular case, Google decided that they needed to compete with the iPhone. As one of the largest companies on earth, they had plenty of cash. They could have created a new division. They have all the bright engineers, but they said, we need to be in the phone business, the handset business. We need to compete with the iPhone. And Motorola, this division of Motorola, became the answer to how does Google enter the mobile phone market. So all of a sudden you have Google saying it is worth 12 billion plus in cash for us to simply enter this market. And so it becomes a really, really powerful strategy when you have people trying to enter a new market. So this is one of, I would say, several strategies that you really need to be considering. Is you have to look at buyers in ways that can maximize value. People that are trying to enter new markets often pay the biggest premiums. So where are these buyers? And one of the common mistakes is the path of least resistance for so many of us is we look at our own industry. So if we're a $20 million supplement brand, for example, very likely when it comes time to think about exit, we're thinking there has to be a 50 or 100 or $500 million supplement brand that would be interested in what we've built. And the answer is they probably are. And then many founders will go, or even investment bankers will go 1 degree to the right or left and say, well, we'll talk to supplement brands and companies, and we'll talk to health and wellness. But that is a very limiting factor when specifically we said the biggest premiums often come from outside our industry when people are trying to break in. So we really have to open the aperture much more broadly. Let me give you a personal example real quick. So one of my companies, which was kind of a departure from my typical technology business, was an apparel brand called Mountain Khakis. And if you're not familiar with the brand, think Patagonia, North Face, Columbia. Those are the brands that we would compete with. And we were an early stage startup. We literally started it, raised a little money, and started building out this product. Very quickly, we were actually outselling those brands at retail. So we sold more, and it was started with just pants, right? Hence the name Mountain Khakis. We were selling more pants at retail than Patagonia. We were in about 1,000 retail outlets, and we were struggling to finance our growth. We were growing very quickly. Our brand was resonating with the consumer. Retailers loved us, but we were competing with very, very large multi-hundred million and billion-dollar organizations. So when it came time to either raise capital to continue to grow or sell the business, we did, despite what I just said, took the path of least resistance. We walked out and talked to Yvon Chouinard at Patagonia. We talked to the family that owned Columbia. We talked to VF Corp that owned the North Face. And all of them were interested in buying our company because we were doing very well and it was resonating as a brand. Then we found out that there was a Cerberus-backed company called the Freedom Group, which was traditionally guns and ammo. They owned Remington and lots of other gun companies. And not surprisingly, they were struggling with some PR problems given guns. And they had made a strategic decision that they needed to be in some softer industries. And the way they defined that was camping, hiking, fly fishing, things that were in the kind of quote outdoor industry. So incredibly long story short, we ended up becoming the answer to how does the Freedom Group enter the outdoor space. We were a national or international brand that kind of answered that question for them. Ultimately, when we sold them the business, they paid us 2 times as much for 75%, not even 100% of our company, than all of those other brands were willing to pay for 100%. So again, someone outside our industry trying to break in, willing to pay a premium to get there. Key strategy. All right, so you may be thinking, how do I find these great buyers? It's easy to rattle off, the concept, but how do you do it? And again, because we're going to be really quick here today, I'm more than happy to supply anyone that's interested a link to a real simple spreadsheet. But the idea is when we work with people, we really ask them to come up with 3 to 5 different industries of prospective buyers, people that you don't even know if they're interested yet, to start to build the thesis around why would they want to buy your business. And over time, we start filling out this real simple high-level spreadsheet. And I call it the solid gold buyer sheet because I have seen it happen again and again. When you make the decision that we want to sell or we're thinking about selling, this spreadsheet oftentimes will sort of bubble up these unique scenarios and buyers across different industries. And we have reasons that we think they'd be interested in buying. So this is a simple process that I use and also really aligns to a core philosophy of mine, which is, Einstein called compounding interest the 8th wonder of the world. The same thing is true for exit preparation. Little things that you do now, an hour a week, 30 minutes a week, if you have time, they compound into enormous value over a year or 2 years. This spreadsheet, if you were to fill it out 6 months before you're going to exit, you're really focused on getting a deal done. If it's 2 years or 3 years before an exit, by the time you decide to move into an exit process, you have a robust list of prospective buyers, why they would want to buy you, et cetera. The other thing I would recommend, is just a great exercise for all of us. I use it constantly. But let's say that you have an idea or a thesis around someone that might want to buy your business in the future. You have a reason you think that they may be interested, but you've never talked to them. You don't know that they're interested. A simple thing that you can do is create a Google alert with their company. So google.com/alerts. And for about 15 minutes a day, just read any articles or press releases or press conferences that they put out. Because what happens over time is they literally telegraph where they're going as an organization. The CEO comes on and talks about new products and new ventures and new things they're trying to do and new directions and how they want to leverage AI or machine learning or whatever it is. And all it takes for you is one comment to realize that you or your business might be the answer to exactly what they're trying to do strategically. And that little hook is worth its weight in gold. So if you hear them say, we're really trying to move into the outdoor industry to broaden our market to hiking, fly fishing, camping, that one comment alone led to a very significant exit because we knew we were a potential way for that organization to break into our market. And it's a great mental muscle building exercise, 15 minutes a day to get in the habit of listening to how people talk about their growth, their future, and all you're looking for is that one intersection. All right, one exercise, I think this is really relevant for each of you, particularly as COOs. I do this exercise all the time. It's really high level, but I think you will understand the point quite quickly. What would a prospective buyer see today if they took a deep dive into your business? And to do this, I use this simple scenario I call the 8 a.m. test. So try to think about this literally for 2 minutes with me here. So here's how we set up. It's late one Thursday afternoon. You are relaxing. You're starting to think about a pretty easy Friday and weekend ahead. Maybe you're playing golf or taking some time with your family. So you're kind of easing into the weekend mentally. The phone rings and you pick it up and say, hey, this is Mac speaking. On the other end of the line is John Smith. Now, you don't know John personally, but John is the CEO of your largest competitor. He's kind of an industry icon. So you certainly know who John is. And he cuts to the point right away. He said, look, Mac, I'm calling because we're interested in buying your business. We're ready to pay in cash. We're going to pay above industry average multiples. We can close in as little as 30 days. We're very serious. are you interested? Most people receiving a call like that, first of all, that never happens. I should caveat and say this, this never happens. This would be great if it did. But you would say something along these lines. You would say, hey, John, wow, I'm super flattered. Thank you for your interest. You're obviously catching me off guard. I didn't expect this call, but sure, I would love to learn some more. Should we schedule a meeting? I could do something week after next for sure. And that's when John says, well, that's the catch. Mac, we're actually in town, my CFO and I, but we have to start due diligence tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. or this is a no-go. This can't happen. So if you get this call, this potentially life-changing opportunity, and someone wants to show up at your office tomorrow morning to start due diligence, what is your reaction? Now, practically speaking, there's one of two things that most people will do. They'll either know right then and there that there's no way they could be ready to show their company off at tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And unfortunately, they have to say, John, I'm so, flattered, but unfortunately I have plans tomorrow, we just can't do it. And that is walking away from what could be one of the biggest opportunities of your life. The other scenario, which happens often, is you say, okay, great, I'll see you at 8 o'clock. You hang up, you call your co-founder, you call your CEO, leadership team, spouse, board, next door neighbors, and say, get to the office. We're pulling an all-nighter, doing everything you can because there are files everywhere. Financials aren't completely updated. You've got employment agreements for some employees, not for all. All of those things you're going to scramble, but you're still going to know in your heart and in your head when they show up at 8 o'clock, you didn't do everything you could. You're not ready. So what I really feel strongly about is I want people to be in this position where if someone were to show up, you are absolutely smiling and saying, I can't wait for them to show up, because the reality is John is doing this as a strategy. He wants to catch you off guard. He has an expectation that you're not ready, and he wants to see what that looks like. When I was on the board of a big company doing acquisitions, we were doing, $100+ million acquisitions. I would sometimes show up to meetings an hour early of companies that we were trying to buy and just see how far I could walk in the office asking different people what they did. And it was amazing how inconsistent the message was between the front desk and the marketing department and the ops department and the finance team and the tech team. And that's the expectation. That's a low bar that most companies sit at. My goal is that people are fully prepared and almost excited to show how dialed in that you are. So I believe very fundamentally that being ready to sell, knowing that it's at maximum value, just means you have options. And that word option is the most important part of this. I want you to have the option, not the obligation to sell, not to be forced to sell, but to have the option. That's the most powerful part. All right, last critical shift. I will go through this quickly and take questions. Proactive, not reactive. I call this the super strategy. And because of my background, I went from business to business for almost 25 years straight, literally, sold a company and I was already working on the next one. And I just was really never taking the time. So after I sold my last business in October of 2018, I did something unique. I took time off and I looked back over all those years and looked at what did I do well, a few things. What are the mistakes I made, which were a lot, but I wanted to do fewer of them in the future. And I was just looking for threads so that in the future, I could do more of what worked, less of what didn't, and just be more thoughtful about that process. And it was a really, really interesting surprise, kind of a discovery of a thread, that there was a point in time in every one of my businesses where I could literally see we made a decision and something changed. And that change not only led to our ability to ultimately sell the company, which we chose to do. That was kind of our decision, is to sell. Sometimes we needed to, sometimes we wanted to, but it also would be the point in time where I, as a founder, increased my personal freedom. All of a sudden I could see it as clear as day that I went from being in the critical path of everything to a little more free, a little bit more able to do things outside of the core business. The business also typically had an inflection point of scale that followed this. So what was that? It was basically the minute we made the decision that we thought we wanted to sell the company, we started looking at our business and asking questions through the lens of a prospective buyer, right? All of a sudden we would say, what would a prospective buyer think about that, right? Because that's a question that we didn't care about before. Before it was, does this lead to growth? Does this lead to market share? Does this help us scale? Does this help us do what we care about, mission, vision, core values? All of a sudden, by adding that one question, I could see that bright line that after that moment, things started to change. And so one of the things that I would say are very actionable for all of you, literally today, starting today, is using what I call exit DNA questions. So however you make decisions today, your normal process, your normal leadership discussions, you would just add this simple series of questions as example to that. So when you are making a decision to launch a new product or make a new hire or any of those strategic things, you would just say, does this decrease or increase dependency on me? Now, of course, this is making the assumption that you are in the critical path. Maybe it's you are not as the COO, but maybe your CEO and founder is. And so you could ask the question either way, because the reality is decisions that increase dependency on any core employees are negative for you personally and negative to exit value. Nobody wants to buy a company that key people are involved in all of the critical decisions, because that doesn't scale. It's key man risk. And ultimately, if you do sell, you're just going to be locked up in a long-term agreement because they know how critically you are involved in the business. So things that decrease dependency on core executives are actually positive to exit value and very positive to you personally. I love this example. Would a prospective buyer like the decision for office expansion? If you're an East Coast company in the United States and you've decided it's very valuable to be on the West Coast, feet on the street, the path of least resistance for most people, we want to grow geographically. We need humans on the West Coast. We need an office on the West Coast because we're going to serve customers and grow. That may be the right decision. You may come to all the right things. If you just simply say, how would a prospective buyer look at that decision? It might change your thinking, because all of a sudden you may say, you know what? To a prospective buyer, a West Coast office is a liability. It's an obligation. Now they have a lease, a 5-year or 10-year lease that is part of the obligation of purchasing our company. So in that same scenario, you may say, well, we still need to be on the West Coast, but what if we were just to use a co-working space that's month to month before we really go too deep? Because if someone were interested in buying the company and they already had an office on the West Coast, they could shut it down, or they didn't need it, they could turn it off, right? So these are the kind of questions that often lead to increasing exit value, increasing exit likelihood, but also just another valuable lens to build a better business. So what's the big secret? What's the kind of wrap-up comment that I would make to all these things? It is that companies are not bought, they are sold. A lot of people disagree with me on this, and that's why I have it big bold on here. It means to me that it is incumbent on us as leaders in our business, as the COO, the CEO, the founder, co-founder, executive team. We cannot sit around and wait until we're ready to sell our business and people show up and pay us a premium. It is incumbent on us to design our business, to be proactive about it, so that when we want the option to sell, we have it. We know who the type of buyers are. We know how to articulate an irresistible exit story where they're going to want to buy us. We know how to argue our strategic value and use their math. Those are the things that lead to companies being sold versus people showing up and bidding based on EBITDA multiples. All right, so I will shut up. If you have any questions, I am happy to take them. Sorry, I talk so fast.
Matt, that was great. Thank you. I'm going to switch off the, if you can maybe, keep that screen up for a second. We'll start getting some people to put their hands up and ask questions. I've got one to get us started, and then we can take this screen down so we can see who's got their hands up. I have a question related to selling to a strategic versus selling to a PE firm. So what's the difference in terms of selling to each of those? What do you have to do, or how do you position your company, or is one better than the other?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think a common question. So they're generally speaking, there are two big buckets that buyers get kind of lumped into. One is a financial buyer and the other is strategic. And financial buyers can come in a number of forms: private equity firms, venture capital, family office. Sometimes even corporations have, investment groups that are really financial buyers. And then on the other side of the equation are strategics, companies in your industry, companies outside your industry that are looking to break in. And I'm stereotyping a little bit, of course, because they're not all the same. But generally speaking, financial buyers are building portfolios. They have a large pool of capital, $1 million or $1 billion, and they're trying to invest that capital in operating businesses, and they want to have a portfolio of 10, 20 companies that they operate. They tend to be very financially focused because where they generally do well is financial engineering. They buy your business, they replace your line of credit with lower cost lines of credit, they replace your capital with their capital, they reduce headcount. They're really turning dials kind of financially to create higher margin or faster growth. So financial buyers tend to be lower multiples because they're very smart. They're very focused on numbers and that financial engineering aspect. And so they can be great buyers, but that's kind of their bias, is they're financially oriented. Generally speaking, strategic buyers pay bigger premiums because you are a bigger part of their future and strategy. They have identified you as adding important clients or important geography or key products or new brands or some of the things that we talked about. Those become really strategic, and they can just plug it into their math and say, even if they're not generating revenue, we can sell them to our customers, or we can launch that in our markets. And so strategic buyers tend to, hence the name, be highly focused on where you strategically fit into their vision and often pay bigger multiples.
Will strategic buyers or PE buyers want a longer earnout than the other, or will one of them want the owner to stay longer than the other, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably, financial buyers, again, generally, I'm stereotyping broadly, but generally, I would say statistically do one of two things. They buy a business to back the current team, which they're the capital behind it and the financial engineering behind it, but they really want you and your team to continue to do what you do with new resources behind you. Or they already have the expectation they're going to replace you and your team with their bench. They have a CEO that's already sold a company and they want to replace you, and they're so there's a couple of different scenarios they use. Strategic buyers generally are the ones that say, there is some overlap, there is some crossover, but they can be much more flexible on what does the seller want. Is the seller looking to kind of step away, or is the seller really looking to double down, roll some equity in, and sees a bigger picture? Because sometimes that exit is really step one of two. You get money, you take money off the table, but you also have a bite at the apple again in the future when this combined entity sells or recapitalizes. And so they both have different, methods. One thing I would say is I advise everybody I work with that guaranteed cash is really the only metric I calculate. So cash at close, legally guaranteed payments, even if they're paid out over 5 years. I'm still getting paid every month for a deal I did in 2018. That's fine. It's contractually guaranteed. Anything that shifts into an earnout or performance or other is, in my mind, a bonus, but is a very different calculation. And I can tell you plenty of examples of where it's not worked out.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Can you cancel your share screen? Haley, you've got a question?
Yeah. Hey, Mac. That was a great presentation. I had a question around crafting the arc for the irresistible exit story. It seemed like in crafting the arc and the way you presented it, it was more about showing a financial arc based on your own numbers, but then in shifting that around to use their numbers, how might you build an arc for a strategic buy?
Yeah, great question. So I really use the arc to illustrate what I would call a traditional model and a traditional story. So the arc is kind of what people normally do. They talk about year over year, quarter over quarter, past up into present. And what I'm suggesting, which if I wasn't clear, apologies, but is that you kind of push the arc aside and you really focus. The irresistible exit story is based on where you're going and why you're likely to get there. So where you are today, they're always going to want to know about your performance and where you are today. But where you're going is, we just landed a new contract that's going to give us a lot more distribution. We just hired the biggest, salesperson in our industry, and that's why next year we're going to grow X%. So the more we can talk about the future and demonstrably show why we're likely to get there. It can't just be, I mean, the hockey stick of, hey, we're going to triple next year doesn't work. It is, here are the 10 reasons why our company is going to be bigger in the future than it was in the past. So that's kind of part of the irresistible exit story.
Thanks, Mac. We've got time for 2 more quick questions, and then we're going to be sharing your slides and your presentation with all the current members that are on and also about 100 members that were not able to make today's call. We'll be sharing with them as well. Steve Williams, you've got a question, and then I'll read out the question from Walker Meadows.
Yes, thank you, Mac. Very eye-opening. Thank you. You talked about tangible and intangible assets. How do you prioritize intangible assets?
So I look at everything in my mind is basically stacking value. I mean, obviously the things that you have that are tangible and your financials are all an important foundational part of the story. Then it comes into, what can I prioritize and stack on top of that to add value? Intellectual property, the 2 big ones I'll share, trying to go quick. Intellectual property, often underutilized. So it's real simple to get trademarks and copyrights and trade secrets. Patents are a little harder. Low cost, high impact, because it gives you protection around something that matters to you. It becomes proprietary. And the other one I have found is anything you can do that really wraps up exclusivity. How you buy products, how you distribute products, how you hire people, how you work with strategic partners. The more of those things that are truly exclusive or proprietary or protected, the more they tend to add value in the future. That's kind of how I think about it.
And by the way, if you're working with a regional bank or even some of the major banks, explaining a lot of these intangible values to them are going to help them understand why to back your loan as well. They will bank you based on your P&L and your balance sheet, but they're also humans who get swayed, and their models get swayed by some of these intangible values as well. Stephen, you've got a question. You said you called out SaaS companies as a specific exception to the rule of value. Beyond a buyer looking to get into a new SaaS market, how do you typically market maximum value of SaaS companies?
I think, so the metrics around SaaS are different. They're generally well publicized. We can all find kind of where deals are trading in SaaS. I think the same exact thing applies. I work with a lot of people that have SaaS companies. I still look at all of these other shifts and strategic decisions as additive. So whatever the standard multiple is in SaaS that's in your kind of niche, I would be saying, okay, we got that likely plus or minus. Now, how can we find buyers that are not the traditional SaaS buyers? Because the traditional SaaS buyer is going to pay a traditional SaaS multiple. If you find someone who's looking to add SaaS to a non-SaaS business, likely higher. If you find someone outside the industry that is looking to do something different and wants to be in the business you're in, also valuable. So I really think about kind of taking the core metrics of your industry as the baseline, and how can we do some of these other things to stack and add value on top of it.
Mac, do you have time for a couple of other questions?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to call an audible, and I'll get rid of part of one of our breakouts and go into a couple more of the questions that Mac has, because I think there's some really good value with the questions. First question is from Stephen Morgan. Sorry, not Stephen. It was from Walker Meadows. Walker said, how have you balanced your family life and cool experiences through the different stages of your career? Were you only able to focus on that on the later stages, and any resources you'd recommend? And Walker, hopefully you'll be with us at the April in-person event, because one of our speakers, Warren Rustand, is going to blow your mind with his presentation on this and give you a pile of resources and skills in that area too. But go ahead, Mac, if you can answer this.
It's actually a really important question to me. And I'll be, the very short version is, actually, I made a decision in July of 2000. I sold 2 companies early in my life, in my 20s, but up until that point, I was pretty much sleeping on the floor of my office, and I was about to have my first daughter in August of 2000. And I basically told this soon to be born child that I was going to be there for everything. And I said, I'm going to be home for dinner. I'm going to coach your soccer team, etc. And when I made that decision, I honestly didn't know how that was going to work, because I only knew how to work incredibly long hours and hard, but I made this commitment. Long story short, I dropped that daughter off for her freshman year of NYU 19 years later. And over that period of time, I built and sold 4 more companies, and I never missed dinner or donuts for dad or anything else. The way I did it shocked me. It was basically, I started immediately with my next company. I told my team, I said at 5 o'clock or 4:45, no matter what's going on in this company, I'm going to stand up and walk out the door and go home and have dinner with my wife and daughter. The first couple of times I did it, I think people literally thought I was joking, and I walked out. Even if I was talking, I would set the mic down and walk out. But what happened was pretty amazing. Very quickly, my leadership team realized that I wasn't joking. I literally did it again and again and again. Then all of a sudden, pre-meetings would happen. When Mac leaves, who's going to pick up the mic? Since Mac's going to leave, who's going to prepare the presentation and do the follow-up? All of a sudden, my whole team's kind of level of performance got so much bigger and better faster, because I basically threw them in the deep end, and good people swim. And so I did it again and again. I would travel the same way. I would literally call my team and say, I'm taking my daughters to Europe. I'm leaving for 3 weeks. You know, if there's an emergency, here's how you get in touch with me. So that's kind of how I did it, is I just kind of forced the prioritization of my family. I didn't stop being an entrepreneur. I wasn't wealthy enough to retire. So some people are like, well, yeah, that's easy because you made a bunch of money. Well, you know, at the time I was paying for private school and I had a beach house and a lake house. I'd spent a bunch of money. I was a dumb 20-year-old. So I really did it because I made the conscious decision. And the result is I built a lot better companies.
Very cool. Thanks, Mac. Alicia Howard has a question. She said, any advice for how and when to purchase vested NSOs and ISOs when the value is lower, rather than waiting for a liquidation event to exit and the cost to me personally is higher?
Yeah. So from a, you know, that is a tough one. So if you're on the inside of kind of an organization, you have the option to purchase stock options, non-qualified stock, or any form of equity in the business. There's a lot of, you know, decisions and calculations that I can't really speak to. What I would say is you want to, you know, be a part of the decision process, and you want to understand what liquidity looks like. There's a huge gap in expectations. It happens in so many companies where people have this view of value and what it means to be liquid. I always kind of joke around and say, when you tell people you're selling your company, half the company says, you know, oh shit, I'm going to lose my job. What am I going to do? And the other half is thinking, which Ferrari should I buy? Even though they're going to get $10,000, they're thinking, you know, I'm going to go Ferrari shopping, because they don't understand how value or how the waterfall of money will actually play out. So the biggest thing I would say is doing your internal diligence. If you're doing it as a kind of employee trying to buy or participate in equity, and getting external resources, you know, CPAs to look at the companies. If there's a 409A valuation, you know, I had a client last year that had a 409A valuation of 150 million, and the company traded for 8 figures, and a lot of people were upside down. So you really need to do your diligence in terms of how you would participate if and when the company was sold.
That's awesome. Thank you, Mac. Do we have any final questions? We're good to wrap. Again, we'll be sharing all the slides and the video with all of our members. Mac, thank you so much for sharing with us. Really appreciate it. If everybody wants to go off mute, give Mac a big thank you. That'd be awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome, Mac.
Thank you so much, Mac.
Thank you.
Great job, man.
Thanks.